My mom told me I was the most useless child they had. I smiled at the table, packed my bag that night, and 2 years later, she was begging me to save her. She didn't get mercy. If you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or treated like you're worthless, hit that like button, subscribe, and buckle up. Because this story of betrayal, pain, and ultimate revenge is going to blow your mind. Hi, my name is Emily Carter, and this is the story of how my life was destroyed and how I destroyed them right back. It was Christmas Eve, and the Carter family living room glowed with fake warmth, the kind that comes from overpriced decorations and carefully curated smiles. My mother, Margaret, had outdone herself. A massive tree dripping with gold and silver ornaments, a dining table stacked with perfectly roasted turkey, ham, and pies. On the surface, everything looked perfect, but the air it reeked of judgment. I sat across from her, spoon halfway to my mouth, and she looked at me the way a hawk inspects a mouse. My father, Robert, sat quietly beside her, hands folded, eyes darting nervously between us as if hoping the storm might skip over me. My younger sister, Jessica, was practically glowing. She had already unwrapped the BMW keys Margaret handed her earlier, squealing with glee. My gift, $2 measly, $2. Margaret's eyes flicked to me, sharp as a knife. "Emily," she said, voice cold and deliberate, "you're the most useless child we have." I froze. The fork in my hand felt heavier than iron. My blood boiled, but my face stayed calm. I forced a small smile, the one I'd perfected over years of humiliation. Around the table, everyone shifted uncomfortably. Jessica grinned smugly, Robert looked away, and Margaret leaned back, satisfied. I wanted to scream, to throw the plate across the room, to tell her everything I thought about her hypocrisy. But I didn't. I only smiled, nodding like the obedient child I was. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I packed a small bag. A few clothes, my laptop, some cash I'd saved secretly. I left the house quietly, taking one last look at the mansion where I had grown up, trapped under my mother's shadow. I didn't look back. The next 2 years were silent. I disappeared from their carefully constructed world. I rented a small apartment downtown, worked 3 jobs, and started building a life for myself that no one could touch. My mother assumed I was struggling, maybe failing. That assumption, it was perfect. But here's the thing about people like Margaret: they always underestimate the quiet ones. They assume silence is weakness. They don't see the storm brewing behind calm eyes. And I was planning a storm. By the end of the first year, I had started my little empire online, a combination of investments, side businesses, and connections that grew quietly but steadily. I learned about influence, manipulation, and timing. Every meeting, every new connection, every dollar saved was a step toward the day they would regret underestimating me. Then one evening, as I scrolled through social media, I saw her post, a perfectly filtered photo of Jessica leaning against the BMW, captioned, "Best Christmas ever, thanks, Mom." I felt a surge, not of jealousy, but of fire. That post was a declaration. She owned everything, and I had nothing. But she didn't know what I was building in the shadows. And that's when I made my decision. I would not just show them I was successful. I would make them feel every ounce of their arrogance, the same way I had felt every year under that tree, under that smug smile, under that cold, "you're useless" remark. I wanted justice. I wanted satisfaction. I wanted them to remember my name forever. The plan began forming in my head that night, piece by piece. It wasn't hasty. It wasn't reckless. Every detail mattered. Every step was calculated, and when it was ready, I would strike. But first, I had to wait, watch, and let them sink deeper into their false sense of security. I smiled to myself, shutting my laptop. The storm was coming, and when it hit, nothing would ever be the same. The first months away from home were strange. Freedom had a taste I hadn't realized I'd been craving. The air smelled differently in my little downtown apartment, a mix of coffee, city smoke, and the faint perfume of new possibilities. I was nobody, yet suddenly that nobody mattered more than they could ever imagine. I cooked my own meals, organized my own days, and most importantly, I controlled my own destiny. My mornings were early and relentless. I worked at a cafe, served tables with a polite smile while mentally planning my next move. Afternoons were for freelance projects, writing, small marketing jobs, anything to bring in extra cash. Evenings, I dove into learning everything I hadn't had time for while under their roof: finance, social media influence, online business strategies. Every click, every article, every conversation I had in those dark apartments was building something Margaret and Robert would never see coming. But it wasn't just about money. It was about power, subtle and precise. I learned about social engineering, how to get people to trust you, how to appear invisible while collecting information. Every post my mother made online, every boast about Jessica's latest gift or vacation, I cataloged. Every detail about their lifestyle, every weakness I could exploit, I memorized. One rainy evening, I was sitting at my laptop, sipping cold coffee, when an idea struck me like a bolt. I remembered the Christmas dinner, Margaret's smug expression, Jessica's victorious grin, Robert's quiet complicity, and I realized exactly what I had to do. First, I needed to become untouchable. Not just financially independent, but untouchable socially and professionally. I had to climb to a place where they would never see me coming, and I began planting small seeds. I started an online consulting business, helping small startups grow. I volunteered for networking events, sometimes hiding in plain sight, watching the powerful people laugh and joke, unaware of the storm brewing in my quiet corner. The thrill of it consumed me. Every day I woke with a purpose that my old life had never given me. And yet the memory of Margaret's words, "You're the most useless child we have," lingered, stinging sharper than any insult I had ever endured. That phrase became my fuel. It wasn't enough to simply succeed. I had to humiliate them in the process. Months passed. Small victories accumulated. A business deal here, a client there, tiny steps that went unnoticed by anyone but me. I began documenting everything, creating meticulous records of who said what, who boasted what, who was vulnerable where. My obsession with detail became my advantage. Then came the first breakthrough. Through a contact I had made at a networking seminar, I discovered a financial opportunity, one that could make me not just comfortable, but untouchably wealthy. It required risk, patience, and precision, but that was nothing compared to living under my mother's constant judgment. By the end of that year, my online empire was quietly flourishing. My social media accounts were polished and professional, my freelance work was earning more than I had ever imagined, and my knowledge of business tactics was growing daily. I even started to notice people reacting differently to me, strangers treating me with respect, potential clients eager for my advice. I felt a taste of power I had never experienced under Margaret's roof. Yet every night before I slept, I revisited the memory of that Christmas dinner. The sound of my mother's voice slicing through the room, Jessica's laughter ringing like nails on a chalkboard, Robert's helpless silence. I smiled quietly to myself. They thought I had vanished, that I was powerless, that I had disappeared into nothingness. But I was preparing, and the day I returned, I would be unstoppable. One evening, as I scrolled through a lifestyle magazine online, I saw a feature on the Carter family, Margaret boasting about Jessica's latest luxury purchase, a lavish vacation, the BMW, the whole picture-perfect life. I felt a strange satisfaction. I wasn't angry, I was focused. Every detail of their lives was a thread, and I intended to pull them all apart one by one. But I had to be patient. The best revenge wasn't impulsive. It was calculated, deliberate, and inescapable. And as I sipped my third cup of coffee that night, I whispered to myself, "They will pay, every single one of them, and they won't even see it coming." By the time I went to sleep, I had already drafted the first phase of my plan, subtle, silent, and utterly devastating. I would reappear in their lives not as the useless Emily they remembered, but as someone they could never ignore, never underestimate, and never control. The storm was no longer just a thought in my mind. It had taken form, and when it hit, it would consume them completely. 2 years had passed since I left the Carter mansion. 2 years of invisible growth, 2 years of silent planning, and 2 years of watching from the shadows as my family continued their comfortable little lives, blind to the storm I was becoming. It began innocuously. A friend tagged me in a photo of the Carter family at a charity gala. Margaret was beaming, Jessica in a designer dress, Robert quietly smiling beside them. I scrolled past, my heart steady. I didn't feel envy anymore, just focus. Every detail, every pattern of their social appearances I catalogued. Who attended which event, which friends were weak links, which businesses they were involved in. Each was a potential lever I could pull. The first step was subtle, reconnecting with people in their circle, but under a different guise. I created a persona, professional, confident, influential. No one would recognize the Emily they had dismissed as useless. I reached out to a mutual acquaintance who often networked with the Carters. I positioned myself as an expert consultant, offering insights and advice, everything impeccably polished and professional. Soon I was invited to a social mixer, one of the events Margaret attended regularly. I walked in, confident, wearing a sleek black dress that commanded attention without shouting for it. Heads turned, conversations paused, but no one connected me to the meek Emily Carter they remembered. I let them underestimate me, it was part of the plan. From across the room, I saw them. Margaret in a gold gown that screamed wealth, Jessica laughing loudly, Robert smiling nervously. I felt a thrill, but I kept it contained. I wasn't here to confront them, not yet. I was here to observe, to test their arrogance, to find cracks I could exploit. I overheard Margaret boasting to a friend about Jessica's latest business venture, her voice dripping with pride. "Jessica is such a prodigy. And Emily, well, she's off doing whatever it is she does." The slight in her tone was unmistakable, but it didn't faze me. Inside, I was already drafting how I would turn that pride against her. Then came my first opportunity. A conversation between Margaret and one of her high-profile contacts revealed that the family business was vulnerable, over-leveraged, with sloppy bookkeeping and weak oversight. Margaret had been relying entirely on Robert to manage finances, which he did poorly. I smiled to myself. This was the opening I needed. I started small, subtle online nudges, offering financial advice to Margaret's acquaintances under my professional persona, planting seeds of doubt, making suggestions that would eventually put pressure on her decisions. No one knew Emily Carter was behind the messages, but I watched them take root. Margaret's confidence began to wobble. Jessica, of course, remained blissfully unaware. She continued flaunting her life, posting every success online. I followed every post meticulously, cataloging every asset, every connection, every weakness. I knew where the fractures in their perfect facade were, and I planned to hit them all simultaneously. But I didn't stop at financial leverage. I needed emotional impact. I began reconnecting with distant relatives and old friends Margaret had alienated over the years, subtly hinting at opportunities and successes that Emily Carter had achieved in secret. Gossip spread quietly, like a shadow, painting a picture of someone completely transformed, someone untouchable. Then the moment came. At a gala, Margaret's friend introduced me formally, not knowing who I was. I extended a hand with a smile. "Emily Carter," I said. Her eyes widened just slightly, a flicker of recognition. But I didn't give her more. I was still the professional, polished consultant. The Emily she had underestimated was gone. Margaret's pride started to crack, but she masked it with a forced smile. Jessica didn't notice, laughing and chatting. Robert remained distracted, as always. But inside, I could feel the tension building. Every small move I made, every whispered suggestion, every polite correction to Margaret's plans, every subtle demonstration of competence, was digging the first trench for my revenge. And then, just as I was leaving the gala, I dropped the first real bomb. A casual remark to a mutual acquaintance, just loud enough for Margaret to hear. "It's fascinating how Emily Carter has turned everything she touches into a success. I heard she's quietly managing over $500,000 in assets now." Margaret froze. Her eyes flicked toward me, but I was already smiling politely at someone else. Jessica, oblivious, clapped me on the shoulder, completely unaware of the earthquake I had just triggered. Robert looked confused, then uneasy. And Margaret's carefully constructed facade cracked ever so slightly. It was the first real victory. The first domino had fallen, and the storm was still gathering strength. The thrill of that first victory pulsed through me like electricity. Margaret's slight hesitation at the gala wasn't enough, not yet, but it was proof that she had underestimated me for the last time. I knew from experience that the best revenge wasn't loud or impulsive. It was a series of precise, calculated moves that would leave her unraveling without even realizing how it began. I started by focusing on the Carter family business. Margaret had been careless, relying entirely on Robert, who was too timid to challenge her or properly manage finances. Their accounting was sloppy, and some of the contracts were outdated, leaving them vulnerable to legal and financial pitfalls. I reached out to a trusted associate under my professional persona, a financial strategist, and quietly started reviewing their company's public filings, investor relationships, and business contacts. I discovered cracks I could exploit immediately: unreported debts, mismanaged partnerships, and a key client who had been neglected for months. I smiled. Each weakness was a thread I could pull, each misstep an opportunity to make Margaret and Robert feel the full weight of their arrogance. But I didn't want it to be just business. They had humiliated me, ignored me, treated me as worthless. I needed psychological impact. My plan had to be personal, public, and undeniable. I began carefully planting rumors in professional circles, harmless enough to avoid legal trouble, but precise enough that Margaret would hear about them. Word spread quietly. Emily Carter, the useless child, was now managing multi-million-dollar portfolios, advising startups, and attending exclusive financial seminars. The whispers reached Margaret's social network first. She tried to dismiss them at first, but the repetition and the source credibility made her start questioning her assumptions. Jessica, of course, remained blissfully ignorant. She posted constantly about her luxury life online, the BMW, the designer bags, the vacations. I followed every post meticulously, recording each detail for later. Each display of arrogance and entitlement was a nail in the coffin I was slowly building. Then came the subtle financial strike. Using the research I'd gathered, I positioned myself as a potential investor to one of their neglected business partners. I offered strategic advice, capital, and influence. The partner, grateful for the assistance, began implementing changes that directly competed with the Carter family business. Margaret and Robert noticed increased competition almost immediately, though they couldn't figure out why. I didn't contact them directly. I never needed to. I was invisible, and yet every move I made pushed their empire closer to instability. Meanwhile, I began reconnecting with people from Margaret's social circle, distant relatives, old friends, even business acquaintances she had alienated over the years. I positioned myself as an expert, a rising star, someone who had been underestimated and was now untouchable. The gossip spread quietly, a shadow circling the Carters' perfect facade. Margaret noticed the subtle shifts in perception, but she couldn't put her finger on the cause. Every invitation she extended, every compliment she sought, was met with the growing awareness that Emily Carter, the useless child, was no longer beneath her. The real psychological blow came when I arranged a seemingly casual meeting with a mutual acquaintance Margaret trusted. Over lunch, I casually mentioned a recent investment opportunity I had led, one that had brought in 6 figures in just a few months. The acquaintance's eyes widened, impressed. "Emily Carter, the one Margaret always dismissed?" they asked. I smiled. "The same." Margaret, who had been seated nearby, heard just enough to freeze mid-conversation. Robert, as usual, tried to intervene with a weak laugh. Jessica, too preoccupied with her phone, barely registered what was happening. But Margaret's face paled. Pride, arrogance, and control, all shattered in a single, perfectly timed revelation. I could feel the tension building like a coiled spring. The Carter family was still powerful, still wealthy, but cracks had begun to appear. The first domino had fallen, and each move I made from here would be faster, more devastating, and deeply personal. By the time I left that lunch, I had mapped out the next phase of my plan. Public exposure combined with financial leverage, ensuring that Margaret's pride would be shattered, Jessica's arrogance humbled, and Robert forced to face his complicity. And it would all happen in a way that no one could ignore, a perfect storm of humiliation and justice. That night, as I reviewed my notes, I smiled quietly. 2 years of patience, observation, and meticulous planning were about to pay off. Margaret thought she had won, that she had raised a useless child. But she had only created a monster in disguise, a monster with the patience to wait, the cunning to plan, and the power to destroy everything she had built on arrogance and cruelty. And the storm was no longer coming. It was here, quietly circling, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The execution phase began quietly, almost imperceptibly. I had spent 2 years building my arsenal, financial leverage, social influence, and the perfect persona. Now it was time to let the pieces fall, like dominoes arranged with precision. The first target was Jessica. Her arrogance had grown unchecked. Every Instagram post, every boastful story, every picture of luxury was another opportunity for me. I reached out to a mutual acquaintance of hers, posing as an influential figure in a social circle Jessica coveted. I offered her exclusive connections for her supposed business ventures, advice, and partnership opportunities that seemed too good to ignore. Jessica took the bait immediately, bragging about the meetings online without realizing she had just exposed her overconfidence and lack of real expertise. I let the posts circulate, carefully ensuring they reached Margaret and Robert. Margaret's pride swelled at first, thinking Jessica's success reflected well on the family. But I had planted seeds of doubt in the very same network. Questions whispered subtly about Jessica's capability, about her reliance on luck and family money. By the time Margaret realized, the whispers had grown into a chorus. Meanwhile, I targeted the family business. Using the information I had gathered, I approached one of the Carter family's neglected partners under a professional guise. I proposed strategic improvements, offering capital and guidance that directly competed with the Carters' operations. Slowly, contracts were redirected, clients began exploring alternative options, and small but meaningful financial losses began to appear. Margaret was frantic, consulting advisors, who all confirmed that something unseen was sabotaging her empire. At home, Margaret was unraveling. Her cold demeanor wavered in public, her voice lost its assured tone, and subtle cracks in her confidence became increasingly visible. I watched her falter during gala events, overheard the murmurs of acquaintances questioning her authority, and reveled quietly in the irony. She had spent years projecting dominance, but in truth, her control had always been superficial, and I was exposing it. Then came the perfect psychological strike. I arranged a casual chance meeting with Margaret at a business luncheon, presenting myself as a highly successful consultant with inside knowledge of emerging financial opportunities. I complimented her on her daughter's achievements, casually mentioned Jessica's latest high-profile failure, a minor business misstep I had exaggerated through rumors, and hinted at exclusive connections that I controlled. Margaret's reaction was instantaneous, a flicker of panic, followed by the cold mask of composure she always relied on. But beneath the surface, she was shaking. I could see it in the tightening of her jaw, the slight stutter in her voice, the way her hands clenched around the silverware. I smiled politely, keeping my tone casual. She had no idea that Emily Carter, the useless child, was orchestrating the collapse of everything she valued. Jessica, oblivious to the growing pressure, continued her online flaunting. I used her posts to my advantage, highlighting inconsistencies, exaggerating minor mistakes, and sending subtle messages to her contacts that hinted at incompetence. Within weeks, whispers of doubt spread, making even her closest friends question her judgment. I watched, taking meticulous notes, savoring every small crack in their facade. And Robert, poor Robert. He had always been passive, a spectator to Margaret's tyranny. But as the dominoes fell, he began to panic. The family business was losing clients, Jessica's reputation was faltering, and Margaret's confidence was crumbling. He turned to me for advice, seeing Emily Carter as a respected expert. I offered guidance, but guidance that ensured the chaos continued, carefully calibrated to maximize Margaret's humiliation and sense of helplessness. By the end of the first month of my campaign, the Carters' lives were subtly but undeniably shifting. Margaret was questioning every decision, second-guessing herself constantly. Jessica had begun to lash out online, desperate to maintain her image, but the whispers had taken root. And Robert was caught in the crossfire, unsure who to trust, unable to regain control. I was careful to maintain my distance, appearing as a successful, polished consultant who just happened to be everywhere, giving advice and guidance. They had no idea that the quiet, useless Emily from Christmas Eve was now the force dismantling their world piece by piece. And the most satisfying part, they had no idea who I really was. One evening, I received an email from a mutual contact. "Your influence is incredible. Margaret is asking about you everywhere." I smiled, knowing that the perfect storm was building. Soon, Margaret would be forced to confront me directly, and when that moment came, it would be perfectly devastating. I leaned back in my chair that night, sipping a glass of wine, and whispered to myself, 2 years of patience, planning, and silence, and now it's finally time for the real pain to begin. The final phase of my plan was ready. 2 years of preparation, observation, and subtle manipulation had brought me to this point. Margaret and Jessica were already teetering on the edge, cracks in their empire, whispers of incompetence, and growing social doubt. It was time to push them over the edge, publicly, painfully, and irrevocably. I chose the perfect event, the Carter family's annual charity gala. Margaret had always prided herself on appearances, and this event was her stage. Socialites, business contacts, and family friends would all be there, the perfect audience, and I would be the storm crashing through her carefully constructed facade. I arrived early, wearing a sleek, understated black gown that radiated power. No one recognized me at first. I smiled politely at familiar faces, collected whispers of gossip, and let them see exactly what they had underestimated. Margaret arrived later, radiant in gold, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for validation. Jessica trailed behind, laughing and posing for photos. Robert lingered nervously, sensing a tension in the air he didn't understand. I approached the event coordinator, casually ensuring that I had a speaking moment scheduled during the main presentation. My plan was simple but devastating, a combination of truth, exposure, and spectacle. When the gala began, Margaret took the stage to deliver her usual speech, praising the family's accomplishments and Jessica's success. The audience applauded politely, oblivious to the storm brewing in their midst. I waited, watching Margaret beam, her pride palpable. And then the moment arrived. During a brief intermission, I was introduced by the coordinator as a special guest speaker, Emily Carter, an accomplished entrepreneur, philanthropist, and consultant. The room went silent. Margaret froze mid-step, her smile faltering. Jessica blinked, confused. Robert's mouth opened slightly, stunned. I walked to the microphone, exuding calm authority. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady and clear. "I want to share a story about family, ambition, and underestimated potential. You see, 2 years ago, I was called the most useless child anyone had ever seen." I paused, letting the words sink in. The room shifted uncomfortably. Margaret's face went pale. I was ignored, dismissed, and given nothing while others were celebrated. I continued, glancing briefly at Jessica. But while they were busy flaunting their success, I was building mine, quietly, carefully, and deliberately. The gasps began. Margaret's friends exchanged glances. Jessica's confident posture faltered. I smiled, savoring the moment. "And today," I said, raising a glass slightly, "the family business that was thought to be untouchable is facing competition, competition I've quietly orchestrated. Investments are shifting, clients are questioning leadership, and reputations are crumbling. All because the so-called useless child was underestimated." The room erupted in murmurs. Margaret's hands shook. Jessica's eyes widened, her bravado gone. Robert tried to speak, but no words came. I let the pause linger, enjoying their humiliation. Then I delivered the final blow. And for those of you who thought success was inherited, let me clarify, it is earned through intelligence, patience, and perseverance. You may have overlooked me, mocked me, and dismissed me, but I am here now, and everyone in this room knows it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Margaret's face was red, a mixture of rage and disbelief. Jessica's mouth opened, then closed, unable to recover. Robert slumped in his chair, powerless. I walked off the stage with calm composure, leaving them exposed, vulnerable, and utterly humiliated. But the public exposure was only part of the revenge. Over the next weeks, I continued executing financial maneuvers I had already set in motion. Contracts shifted, investors reconsidered, and the Carters' reputation as shrewd and untouchable crumbled. Margaret was forced to take corrective action publicly, admitting mistakes she never thought she'd make. Jessica's social circle questioned her judgment openly, her confidence shattered. Robert, finally realizing the full scope of what had happened, had no recourse, no authority, no leverage, no control. And through it all, I remained calm, invisible, untouchable. The girl they had dismissed as useless was now the architect of their downfall, and they couldn't do anything about it. After the gala, the world seemed quieter. Margaret's empire was wobbling, Jessica's social standing was shattered, and Robert's helplessness was absolute. But the real victory was quieter, deeper, the victory of personal closure. I sat in my apartment late at night, the city lights casting soft shadows across the room. I replayed every moment of the gala in my mind, savoring how Margaret had frozen, how Jessica had faltered, how Robert had grasped for control and found none. But beneath the satisfaction, a new feeling settled in, a calm, almost meditative clarity. For years, I had carried the weight of their words, their dismissals, and their constant comparison of me to Jessica. I had been angry, resentful, and powerless. But now, I wasn't just successful, I was free. Free from their judgment, free from their control, free from the invisible chains they had wrapped around me as a child. Messages began arriving. Friends and acquaintances congratulated me on my success. People Margaret had considered allies were now reaching out to me directly. Even distant relatives whispered their admiration, surprised at the transformation. The whispers Margaret had feared, the doubts I had planted, were now replaced by undeniable respect for me. And then came the final moment of personal closure. Margaret, in a desperate attempt to salvage her pride, reached out. Her message was formal, almost brittle. "Emily, I want to meet. We need to talk." I read it slowly, savoring every syllable. She expected reconciliation. She expected forgiveness. She expected me to be humbled. I smiled and typed a short response. "Margaret, I have no interest in your apologies. I only hope you understand now what it means to underestimate someone." It was the perfect closure. I didn't need her begging. I didn't need her tears. I didn't need her approval. I had achieved something far greater. I had reclaimed my life, my power, and my dignity. The Carters would never forget it. They would never look at me the same way again. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought. I poured myself a glass of wine and leaned back, the city lights reflecting in the glass. I allowed myself to feel it fully, the relief, the triumph, the satisfaction. Every insult, every dismissal, every useless label had been transformed into fuel that built me into someone unstoppable. And as I sat there, I realized the most important truth. Revenge isn't just about making someone else pay. It's about taking back your life, your confidence, and your sense of self. It's about proving first to yourself, then to the world, that you are more than anyone has ever told you. I closed my eyes and whispered softly, almost to no one. Sometimes revenge isn't about getting even. It's about finally letting go of someone who never deserved a place in your life. I poured another sip of wine, smiled, and felt the storm that had once consumed me settle into calm strength. I was free. I was powerful. And the Carters, well, they would never forget the name Emily Carter. That night after the gala, I sat alone in my apartment, reflecting on the events. Margaret's anger, Jessica's humiliation, Robert's helplessness. All of it was satisfying, yes, but more than that, it was complete closure. I had waited, planned, and executed perfectly. And now I could finally breathe. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet, powerful calm. The Carters had learned a lesson they would never forget. Never underestimate someone who has nothing to lose, but everything to prove. The city lights outside my apartment twinkled like distant stars. But inside, there was a new light, a light that came from knowing I had taken control of my life. The Carters had been humbled, my mother's arrogance shattered, my sister's hubris dismantled, and my father forced to face the reality he had ignored for years. Yet more than their downfall, I felt something even deeper: freedom. I reflected on the 2 years it had taken, every long night of work, every calculated move, every careful whisper and observation. I thought of the Christmas dinner, the words that had haunted me: "You're the most useless child we have." Those words had once felt like a weight crushing me, but now they were the fuel that built a fire no one could extinguish. I picked up my glass and whispered to the empty room, as if speaking to anyone who had ever been underestimated. Revenge isn't always about watching someone fall. Sometimes it's about rising so high they can't ignore you, and knowing you never needed their approval in the first place. And then I smiled, the kind of smile that comes only when a long, painful chapter closes perfectly. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't seeking validation. I had done what I had set out to do. I had taken back my dignity, my strength, and my life. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or treated like you were worthless, remember this: the quiet ones are the most dangerous when they finally decide to act. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply being better than they ever imagined. So, if this story gave you chills, hit that like button and tell us in the comments about the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen. Subscribe for more stories like this, because the world is full of quiet storms waiting to rise, and you never know when someone underestimated today will be unstoppable tomorrow. I raised my glass one last time and whispered, "To the underestimated, the overlooked, and the silent, your time will come." The storm had passed, the Carters were humbled, and I, Emily Carter, was free. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear about the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because I share stories like this every week, stories of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate justice. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button now, and join me for the next shocking tale of someone underestimated and unstoppable.